Sympathy. Tough break, sis. Valerie didn't even try to hide her smirk. Well, at least you won't have to visit the public library anymore. My father frowned, seemingly genuinely concerned about the apparent disparity. Stuart, he addressed the attorney. There must be something else for Sophia? This seems unequal. Mr. Harrington shook his head. Martin was quite specific. The library is Sophia's inheritance. There's a separate letter for her that explains his wishes in more detail. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Uncle Martin's distinctive handwriting. As the family dispersed to explore their newly acquired properties and assets, I remained in the library, apparently now my library, clutching the unopened letter. The sudden shift from mourning a rarely seen uncle to becoming the owner of thousands of old books left me disoriented. James clapped a hand on my shoulder as he left. Don't worry, I'll help you sell these old things. Might fetch enough for a decent vacation at least. Or we could clear the shelves and convert this into a home theater, Valerie suggested, eyeing the space speculatively. The room itself has potential. After everyone left, I sank into Uncle Martin's worn leather chair behind the massive oak desk and finally opened the letter. My dear Sophia, it began in Uncle Martin's precise script. If you're reading this, I've moved on to what I hope is an even greater library beyond. Don't mourn too deeply. At 87, I've had a fuller life than most could imagine. I've watched you grow from a curious child into a thoughtful young woman who understands the true value of knowledge. While the others see only dusty tomes taking up space, you've always sensed there's more to books than mere words on paper. You're right. What I've left you appears modest compared to the material wealth bestowed upon your relatives. They'll pity you, perhaps even mock your inheritance. Let them. They measure value by what they can spend or display. My library represents my life's work, a collection spanning 6 decades, 7 continents, and countless adventures. These aren't merely books, they're doorways, Sophia. Each volume has a story beyond the one printed on its pages. The collection includes first editions, signed copies, and manuscripts, thought lost to history. Some were acquired through conventional means: auctions, estate sales, specialist dealers. Others came to me through less conventional channels during my work with certain government agencies and private collectors. Look beyond the obvious. The catalog in the bottom left drawer of my desk will guide you, but trust your instincts as well. You've always had a gift for finding hidden meaning. Be careful whom you trust with knowledge of the full collection. Some items carry complicated provenance, and there are those who would go to extraordinary lengths to acquire them. Harrison Blackwood at Christie's is discreet and knowledgeable. If you decide to sell any items, consult only with him. Remember that true wealth isn't always evident at first glance. With affection and confidence in your judgment, your Uncle Martin. I read the letter twice more, trying to absorb its meaning. Uncle Martin had always been cryptic, but this seemed excessive even for him. What did he mean by complicated provenance? And why the warning about whom to trust? My first instinct was to dismiss it as the dramatic flair of an old man who'd spent too much time alone with his books. But something about the specificity of his instructions gave me pause. I opened the bottom left drawer and found an old-fashioned card catalog box, meticulously maintained with hundreds of index cards in Uncle Martin's handwriting. Each card contained detailed information about a specific book, publication details, purchase information, condition notes, and what appeared to be a complex coding system I didn't understand. Some cards had red stars in the corner, others had small symbols that meant nothing to me. It was getting late, and the emotional weight of the day had left me exhausted. I decided to return the next day with fresh eyes and perhaps begin the process of evaluating the collection for sale. Despite Uncle Martin's obvious attachment to his books, I couldn't imagine keeping thousands of old volumes in my small apartment. The next morning, I arrived with coffee and determination. If I was going to sell this collection, I needed to understand what I had. I remembered Uncle Martin's recommendation and called Christie's, asking for Harrison Blackwood. Ms. Blackwood. The receptionist said after a pause. Mr. Blackwood has been expecting your call. He can see you today at 2 p.m. if that's convenient. Expecting my call? Uncle Martin must have arranged this in advance. I spent the morning randomly selecting books from different shelves, trying to get a sense of the collection. The variety was staggering. Leather-bound classics, modern first editions, ancient-looking tomes in languages I couldn't identify, and everything in between. One shelf held what appeared to be travel journals, handwritten in Uncle Martin's script, detailing expeditions to places I'd never heard of. Another contained scientific texts, spanning from early astronomy to modern physics. A locked glass case protected what looked like religious manuscripts and scrolls. By noon, I was more confused than ever. The collection seemed to lack any organizing principle besides Uncle Martin's eclectic interests. I couldn't even estimate its value. Some books looked ancient and potentially valuable, while others appeared to be common editions available in any bookstore. At 1:30, I selected a few volumes that seemed potentially valuable. A leather-bound Shakespeare collection, what appeared to be a first edition Hemingway, and an unusual atlas with hand-colored maps, and drove to Christie's offices downtown. Harrison Blackwood was not what I expected. Rather than the elderly, tweed-jacketed academic I'd imagined, he was a sharp-eyed man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a tailored suit. His office walls displayed not auction catalogs but framed photographs of him in remote locations, archaeological digs, mountain ranges, and what looked like a submarine interior. "Miss Blackwood," he greeted me, shaking my hand firmly. I was deeply sorry to hear about Martin. He was a colleague and friend for 30 years. "You knew my uncle well?" I asked, surprised. Uncle Martin had rarely mentioned specific friends. "As well as anyone could know Martin?" Harrison smiled slightly. "He was a private man with extraordinary talents. I assume he left you his library?" When I nodded, he continued, "And I further assume you're here to discuss its valuation and potential sale?" "Yes," I admitted. "It's an impressive collection, but I live in a small apartment. I brought a few samples that seemed potentially valuable." I placed the books I'd brought on his desk. Harrison barely glanced at them. "These are from his public collection, the front-facing shelves accessible to visitors. Valuable, certainly, but not exceptional. The Shakespeare is worth perhaps $3,000, the Hemingway $7, $500 if authenticated." His dismissive assessment surprised me. "There's more than what's on display?" "Martin didn't explain?" Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Of course he didn't. Martin always enjoyed his little mysteries." He sighed. "Ms. Blackwood. Sophia, please." "Sophia, your uncle's collection is unusual. The books visible to casual visitors represent perhaps 10% of its true extent, and maybe 1% of its value." I stared at him. "I don't understand. Did Martin leave you a catalog? A guide of some sort?" I thought of the card catalog box. "Yes, but it uses some kind of coding system I don't understand." Harrison nodded. "That would be his classification system. Part Library of Congress, part his own invention." He checked his watch. "I have appointments this afternoon, but I could come to the house tomorrow morning to provide a preliminary assessment. Martin made me promise years ago that I would help you understand what you've inherited." The certainty in his voice convinced me. "Tomorrow at 9? I suggested. "Perfect. And, Sophia, don't discuss the collection with anyone else until we've spoken further." Martin was selective about who knew the full extent of his acquisitions. That night, I returned to the library with new curiosity. If what Harrison suggested was true, there was more to this inheritance than shelves of old books. I examined the room carefully, looking for anything unusual. The library was a perfect rectangle with shelves covering every wall except for windows and doorways. The central space contained reading areas with comfortable chairs, tables, and Uncle Martin's massive desk, all very conventional for a private library. I returned to the card catalog, this time paying closer attention to patterns. Many cards contained location codes that didn't seem to match the visible shelving system. References to Vault B and Secure Room 3 inches appeared repeatedly, especially on cards marked with red stars. On a hunch, I began measuring the room, comparing its dimensions to what I could see of the exterior from windows. After some basic calculations, I realized something didn't add up. The library seemed shorter on the inside than it should be based on the building's exterior. I examined the bookshelves more carefully, running my hands along edges and moldings. On the far wall, behind Uncle Martin's desk, I noticed something odd. A section of shelving where the books were all exactly the same height, their spines showing uniform wear patterns. When I pulled one book, it didn't come out. Instead, there was a mechanical click, and the entire section of shelving swung inward like a door, revealing a dimly lit passageway. I stood frozen, wondering if I'd finally discovered what made Uncle Martin's inheritance truly special, and whether I was ready to find out what lay beyond. I stood at the threshold of the hidden passageway, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The rational part of my brain suggested calling someone, Harrison Blackwood perhaps, or even my brother James. But something in Uncle Martin's letter echoed in my mind. Be careful whom you trust with knowledge of the full collection. Taking a deep breath, I pulled my phone from my pocket and switched on its flashlight. The beam illuminated a narrow corridor with smooth, finished walls. Unlike the dusty ambiance of the main library, this passage was climate-controlled and smelled faintly of preservation chemicals. After about 15 feet, the corridor opened into a room approximately half the size of the main library, but with an entirely different character. Instead of the warm woods and casual arrangement of the outer library, this room was clinically organized with metal shelving, glass display cases, and what appeared to be specialized storage cabinets. Motion-activated lights flickered on as I entered, revealing a space that looked more like a museum archive than a private collection. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The first display case contained a book that made me gasp, a beautifully preserved volume with gilt edges and a leather binding. The small placard beside it read, Don Quixote, First Edition, 1605, acquired from the Valencian Private Collection, 1978. I knew enough about rare books to understand that a first edition Don Quixote was worth millions. Moving through the room in a daze, I found more treasures. A handwritten manuscript with Charles Dickens' signature, what appeared to be original folios of Shakespeare's plays, illuminated medieval manuscripts, and ancient scrolls protected in specialized glass containers. Each item had a small placard noting its identity, origin, and how Uncle Martin had acquired it. Some notations were straightforward, purchased at Sotheby's, 1983, while others were more cryptic. Recovered from Baden Incident, 1967, or Exchange with K Institute, diplomatic intervention required. At the center of the room stood a modern desk with a computer, scanner, and what looked like specialized photography equipment. A leather-bound notebook lay open beside the keyboard. Uncle Martin's handwriting filled its pages. The most recent entry dated just 3 weeks before his death. Authenticated Blake original watercolor today. Provenance confirmed through Carlisle documents. Completes the set of 7. Will arrange secure transport from London next month. I sat heavily in the desk chair, overwhelmed. This hidden collection clearly represented millions, possibly tens of millions in value. And based on Uncle Martin's notes, he had been actively expanding it until just before his death. A small safe was built into the wall behind the desk. Without the combination, I couldn't access whatever might be inside, but a brass plaque on its door read, Personal Sophia in engraved letters. Uncle Martin had anticipated my discovery. I spent hours exploring the hidden archive, carefully examining items without touching them, reading Uncle Martin's meticulous notes and trying to comprehend the magnitude of what I'd inherited. Some sections appeared to be organized by time period, others by region or theme. One entire wall was dedicated to what seemed to be religious or mystical texts from diverse traditions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By the time I checked my watch, it was past midnight. I reluctantly left the hidden room, carefully closing the concealed door behind me. My mind raced with questions that only Harrison Blackwood might be able to answer. I barely slept that night, my dreams filled with ancient manuscripts and secret passages. The following morning, I arrived at the mansion early, anxious to show Harrison my discovery. He arrived precisely at 9 a.m., carrying a leather briefcase and wearing an expression of controlled enthusiasm. "You look like you've made discoveries," he remarked as I led him into the library. "You could say that," I replied, unable to suppress a smile. "Uncle Martin's collection is not what I expected." Harrison chuckled. "Martin always did enjoy surprising people. What have you found?" Rather than explaining, I led him to the bookshelf behind the desk and triggered the hidden mechanism. When the passage revealed itself, Harrison nodded appreciatively but showed no surprise. "Ah, the primary vault. Excellent. He showed you how to access it in his letter?" "No," I admitted. "I figured it out by measuring the room dimensions and noticing the uniform books." Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. "Impressive. Martin was right about you." Before I could ask what he meant, he continued, "Shall we?" We entered the hidden archive together, and Harrison moved through it, with the familiarity of someone who had been there many times. "Martin began this collection in his 20s, he explained, stopping occasionally to examine specific items. What started as a passion for literature evolved into something more specialized." "What do you mean by specialized?" I asked. Harrison paused before a case containing what appeared to be ancient scrolls. "Martin developed expertise in locating and authenticating texts that others believed lost or destroyed. Some of his clients were museums and universities. Others were less conventional. Government agencies," I guessed, remembering the phrasing in Uncle Martin's letter. "Among others, Martin's talents put him in high demand when important historical documents needed to be found, authenticated, or occasionally repatriated." Repatriated? The word seemed carefully chosen. Harrison smiled slightly. "Let's just say that during his career, Martin helped ensure numerous culturally significant items found their way back to their countries of origin, sometimes after being displaced by colonial powers or wartime looting." I processed this information. "Are you suggesting my uncle was some kind of book spy or a high-end thief?" I would say he operated in gray areas where conventional methods were insufficient. Always ethically, in his view, Martin had strict principles about which clients he would work with and which items deserved to be in public collections rather than private hands. Harrison gestured around the room. "These are the pieces he considered too significant, too controversial, or too vulnerable to release into the wider world at present." The implications were staggering. "Is this collection legal?" Harrison's expression grew serious. "A complex question. Many items here have what experts would call complicated provenance, ownership histories with gaps or disputes. Some were acquired through unorthodox channels during political upheavals or conflicts. Martin kept meticulous records documenting his reasoning and methods, which offers some protection." He nodded toward a filing cabinet. "The full documentation is there. So if I wanted to sell these items, some could be sold conventionally through major auction houses. Others would require discretion and careful handling to avoid legal complications or international incidents." Harrison opened his briefcase and removed a folder. "This is my preliminary valuation of the collection based on my previous knowledge of it. Martin asked me to prepare this when his health began failing." I opened the folder and felt my knees weaken. The conservative estimate placed the collection's value at $87 million, with notes indicating several items were potentially priceless due to their historical significance. "This can't be right," I whispered. "It's actually likely an underestimate," Harrison replied calmly. "The market for some of these items has appreciated significantly in recent years." I closed the folder, suddenly feeling the weight of responsibility. What am I supposed to do with all this? I'm a middle school English teacher, not whatever Uncle Martin was. Harrison's expression softened. "Martin believed you were the only family member who would appreciate the collection's true value, not just monetary, but historical and cultural." He gestured toward the safe. "Have you opened that yet?" "No, I don't have the combination." Harrison reached into his pocket and handed me a sealed envelope. "Martin asked me to give you this if you discovered the vault on your own. It should contain the information you need." Inside the envelope was a single card with a series of numbers and a brief note. "Sophia, your birthday, my birthday, and the year we first discussed, the secret garden. You remembered the passage exactly. The memory came back instantly. I was 12, visiting Uncle Martin during summer break. We'd discussed my favorite book, and I'd recited a paragraph from memory. He'd seemed disproportionately pleased by this minor feat. I entered the combination, and the safe door swung open to reveal several documents, a small wooden box, and another sealed letter addressed to me. "I'll give you privacy," Harrison said, stepping away to examine a nearby display case. The letter was longer than the first, written in Uncle Martin's precise hand. "My dearest Sophia, if you're reading this, you've discovered my true legacy and met with Harrison. Good. You'll need his expertise in the days ahead. What I've collected over my lifetime represents more than monetary value. Each item tells a story about human knowledge, creativity, and our eternal struggle to preserve wisdom against time and chaos. You're now the custodian of objects that have survived wars, fires, floods, and deliberate destruction. Some contain knowledge that powerful interests would prefer remained forgotten. Others represent cultural treasures that belong to humanity rather than any individual. This responsibility may seem overwhelming. It is. I've devoted my life to building and protecting this collection, operating in shadows when necessary, making deals with angels and devils alike when the prize warranted such compromise. You have choices. Sell the collection piecemeal through Harrison. He knows which items can be sold openly and which require discretion. This would make you extraordinarily wealthy but scatter the collection forever. Donate significant portions to museums and universities. This would create a remarkable legacy but might expose certain sensitive items to unwelcome scrutiny. Continue my work. The wooden box contains access credentials to my financial accounts and overseas properties, including secure storage facilities in Switzerland, Japan, and Morocco. These resources would allow you to maintain the collection while pursuing items still on my acquisition list. Final page of my research journal. Whatever you choose, remember that knowledge is power, and like all power, it carries both privilege and danger. Trust Harrison, but verify everything. The thumb drive in the wooden box contains encrypted files with my complete records and contacts. Forgive me for burdening you with this complicated inheritance, but among all our family, you alone showed the curiosity, integrity, and reverence for knowledge necessary for this responsibility. With love and confidence, Uncle Martin P.S. The Marlowe manuscript behind the false panel in my bedroom safe would alone fund a comfortable retirement. Consider it your escape hatch if this burden becomes too great." I read the letter twice, each time understanding more about the extraordinary man my uncle had been and why he had chosen me for this inheritance. The wooden box contained banking information showing accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands, with balances totaling over $30 million. Property deeds for small, anonymous-looking buildings in Tokyo, Zurich, and Tangier, and a high-security thumb drive. When I finally looked up, Harrison was watching me with a patient expression. "Questions?" he asked, simply. "About 1,000. I admitted. Starting with, was my uncle some kind of international treasure hunter? Harrison smiled slightly. That's one way to describe it. Martin preferred, specialized acquisitions consultant. He had an uncanny talent for locating lost or stolen cultural treasures, particularly rare texts. Governments, museums, universities, and private collectors sought his services when conventional methods failed. And this collection? Items too significant to trust to others. Some are the only surviving copies of works thought lost forever. Others have political or religious significance that Uzisi Tossin makes them dangerous in the wrong hands. Harrison gestured toward a manuscript under glass. That 8th century theological text contradicts foundational doctrines of 3 major religions. Martin recovered it from smugglers in 1973 and refused offers of millions from collectors who wanted to suppress it. The scope of what Uncle Martin had entrusted to me was becoming clearer and more daunting. "I don't know if I can do this," I admitted. "I'm not. Whatever he was." "Martin didn't expect you to become him overnight," Harrison said gently. "He built this collection over 60 years. He chose you because you share his core values about knowledge and preservation. not because he expected you to immediately step into his rather unusual career. I took a deep breath, feeling both honored by Uncle Martin's trust and overwhelmed by the responsibility. What would you recommend as my first step? Comprehensive inventory and security assessment, Harrison replied promptly. I can help with both. Martin's documentation is excellent, but we should verify everything is present and properly stored. Then we need to ensure the security systems are updated. The collection's existence must remain controlled information. And my family? They think I inherited worthless books. Harrison's expression hardened slightly. Martin had his reasons for that arrangement. Your family members each received generous inheritances tailored to their values. You received what Martin valued most, his life's work and legacy. I would recommend maintaining their current understanding for now. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with multiple messages. James and Valerie were at the front door, having arrived unexpectedly to, quote, help me sort through the books. Their timing couldn't have been worse. I need to deal with my siblings, I told Harrison. They can't find this room. He nodded. Close the vault. I'll meet them as a representative from Christie's evaluating the collection. Follow my lead. We exited the hidden room, carefully securing the concealed door before heading to the mansion's entrance. I took a steadying breath, still processing the revelation that my eccentric uncle had been a globally connected acquirer of rare texts, and that he had entrusted his extraordinary legacy to me. James and Valerie stood in the foyer, both looking impatient. James wore casual designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly salary, while Valerie was dressed for business in a tailored suit. There you are, James said when he saw me. We've been knocking for 10 minutes. Sorry, I was in the library with Mr. Blackwood from Christie's, I explained, gesturing to Harrison. He's helping me evaluate Uncle Martin's books. Valerie's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. You're actually getting them appraised? I thought you'd just donate them to the public library or something. Harrison stepped forward with professional courtesy. Ms. Blackwood's inheritance includes several items of notable value. We're conducting a preliminary assessment today. James looked suddenly interested. Really? Like what? First editions? Among other things, Harrison replied vaguely. The collection is quite diverse. How much are we talking? Valerie asked bluntly. Enough to make it worth keeping? I felt a surge of protectiveness toward Uncle Martin's legacy. I'm not sure yet. That's why Mr. Blackwood is here. James glanced around the foyer, then toward the direction of the library. Mind if we take a look? Maybe there's something in there worth having after all. The casual way he dismissed the collection, my collection now, irritated me, but I kept my expression neutral. Of course. Mr. Blackwood was just showing me how to identify valuable additions. As we walked toward the library, I caught Harrison's eye. He gave me a subtle nod, and I understood we would be showing my siblings only what Uncle Martin had intended them to see. The public face of his extraordinary collection, hiding the true treasure behind ordinary-looking shelves. As James and Valerie entered the library, I watched their expressions shift from bored obligation to mild interest as they took in the impressive space. Well, this is nicer than I expected, Valerie admitted, running her hand along a shelf of leather-bound classics. Some of these look quite old. James wandered toward a glass case containing what appeared to be an antique atlas. How much would something like this fetch? He asked Harrison directly, bypassing me entirely. Harrison maintained his professional demeanor. That particular volume is a 19th century reproduction. Decorative, but not exceptionally valuable. Perhaps $1, $200 to $500 at auction. I noticed how carefully Harrison was playing his role, revealing just enough information to seem credible, while deliberately understating the collection's true value. The atlas was actually an 18th century original, worth closer to $40,000, as he'd quietly told me earlier. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. So what's the most valuable thing here? James pressed, Always focused on the bottom line? Harrison gestured vaguely. There are several first editions that might reach 5 figures at auction. Martin had a good eye for quality, though his interests were rather academic. Valerie frowned. That's it? 5 figures? We thought Uncle Martin was eccentric, not delusional. He left us millions in tangible assets but gave Sophia old books worth maybe 100,000 total? The dismissive tone made my skin prickle. Uncle Martin had entrusted me with treasures beyond price because he knew I would value them for more than their monetary worth. The collection has scholarly significance beyond its market value, I said carefully. Uncle Martin collected works that interested him, not just investments. James laughed. Well, that explains why Dad always called him the family's brilliant failure. All that education and travel, and he ends up with a bunch of dusty books while the rest of us learned how to make actual money. I bit back a sharp retort, remembering Uncle Martin's letter. Let them underestimate the inheritance. Let them believe what made them comfortable. Perhaps we could continue the assessment, Harrison suggested smoothly. I've only examined a small portion of the collection so far. Don't let us stop you, Valerie said, already losing interest. She turned to me. Actually, Sophia, we came by to discuss the mansion. Dad's putting it on the market next month, which means you'll need to clear out these books soon. What? I hadn't expected this. So quickly? James shrugged. The market's hot right now. Dad's already gotten 3 inquiries from developers who want to tear it down and build luxury condos on the property. The thought of Uncle Martin's carefully designed library being demolished sent a chill through me. The hidden vault would be discovered during construction, exposing the collection to precisely the kind of attention Uncle Martin had warned against. I'll need more time, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There are thousands of volumes to catalog and pack. You have 4 weeks, Valerie stated flatly. After that, whatever's left gets cleared out by the demolition crew. Harrison cleared his throat. If I may suggest an alternative, the collection could be temporarily moved to Christie's secure storage facilities while Ms. Blackwood decides what to do with it. We often provide this service for estates with significant literary holdings. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. James looked relieved at the simple solution. Perfect. Problem solved. I'd need to review the costs, I said, playing along while sharing a meaningful glance with Harrison. We both knew that moving the secret collection would require far more than conventional storage arrangements. Whatever, Valerie checked her watch. We need to go. James has a meeting downtown, and I'm showing a penthouse at noon. After they left, Harrison and I returned to the hidden vault. 4 weeks, I said, the reality of the timeline sinking in. That's impossible. There must be thousands of items here. Approximately 700 in the hidden collection alone, Harrison confirmed. But this isn't the first time Martin prepared for such a contingency. There's a protocol in place. He walked to a filing cabinet and retrieved a folder labeled Emergency Relocation. Inside was a detailed plan, including contacts for specialized art movers with security clearances, temperature-controlled transport vehicles, and coordinates for a property I hadn't seen among the deeds in Uncle Martin's box. The Montana facility, Harrison explained. Martin purchased it through a shell corporation 20 years ago. Former military installation, repurposed as a private archive. Self-sufficient power, state-of-the-art security, and completely off official records. He called it his final repository. I stared at the photographs of a nondescript building nestled into a mountainside. He really did think of everything. Martin understood the vulnerabilities of keeping such a collection. The mansion was only meant to be temporary, a working library rather than permanent storage. Harrison closed the folder. We should begin preparations immediately. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of carefully orchestrated chaos. By day, conventional movers packed and labeled the public collection for transport to Christie's warehouses, a process my family monitored with occasional visits and constant texts asking if I was on schedule. By night, Harrison and I worked with a team of specialists who arrived in unmarked vans after dark. These experts, who never provided full names and spoke in the clipped terminology of former military or intelligence operatives, methodically documented, packed, and removed items from the hidden vault. Each night focused on a different section of the collection: medieval manuscripts one evening, ancient scrolls the next, followed by controversial religious texts, and finally, what one specialist cryptically referred to as the material with government interest. During this process, I discovered more about Uncle Martin's extraordinary life through conversations with these specialists, many of whom had worked with him directly. "Your uncle extracted this Coptic manuscript from East Berlin 2 days before the wall went up," a silver-haired woman told me as she carefully packed a fragile text. "He crossed 3 checkpoints with it hidden in a hollowed-out edition of Das Kapital." Ballsy move. Even for Martin. A former museum conservator showed me a collection of Japanese scrolls. These were thought destroyed in the 1923 Tokyo earthquake. Martin tracked them to a private collection in Argentina in the 80s. The Japanese government has been trying to locate them for decades. With each story, my understanding of Uncle Martin transformed. The eccentric relative who appeared at occasional family gatherings had been a mask worn by a man of remarkable courage, scholarship, and principles. A man who had dedicated his life to preserving knowledge that might otherwise have been lost forever. One evening, as we prepared the final items for transport, Harrison presented me with a leather-bound journal. "Martin wanted you to have this when the move was underway. It's his personal account of how he built the collection, the true stories, not the sanitized versions he shared with colleagues." That night, I stayed up reading Uncle Martin's journal, tears frequently blurring my vision as I discovered the grandfather I had never truly known. He wrote of narrow escapes from hostile regimes, of friendships with scholars who shared his passion for preservation, and of the moral compromises he sometimes made to secure items he believed too important to lose. Most moving were his occasional references to me. "Visited Richard's family today. Young Sophia, 9, discovered my pocket edition of the Odyssey and asked intelligent questions about the translation. The others were watching television. Perhaps there is hope for the next generation after all." Sophia, 14, wrote me a letter about Fahrenheit 451. She understood Bradbury's warning at a level that gives me hope. "Have begun adjusting my will accordingly." Dinner with the family at Christmas. Sophia, 22, now studying literature at university, discussed Echoes, The Name of the Rose, and her insights about knowledge as power were remarkably aligned with my own experiences. "The decision is made. She will be the inheritor when the time comes." 3 days before the deadline, the hidden vault was empty, its contents on their way to the Montana facility. The public collection had been moved to Christie's, where Harrison had arranged for a modest appraisal document showing a total value of approximately $300,000, enough to seem respectable, but not enough to make my family suspicious. "What happens now?" I asked Harrison as we stood in the empty library. "Do I just go back to teaching 8th grade English, while secretly being the custodian of an $87 million collection of cultural treasures?" Harrison smiled slightly. "That depends on what you want, Sophia. Martin left you options, not obligations." "I barely understand what I've inherited," I admitted. "The responsibility feels overwhelming." "Then perhaps you should visit the Montana facility," Harrison suggested. "Spend time with the collection in its new home. Martin kept an apartment on the property. You could take a leave of absence from teaching, immerse yourself in the archives, and decide your path forward with greater clarity." The idea was appealing. A chance to connect more deeply with Uncle Martin's legacy while determining my own relationship to it. I think I'd like that. 2 weeks later, having arranged an extended leave from my teaching position for family matters, I drove the winding road up to what appeared to be an ordinary research facility nestled in the Montana mountains. Only the sophisticated security systems and the armed guards, discreetly positioned and dressed as maintenance workers, hinted at what lay within. The interior of the facility was a revelation. A modern, climate-controlled space with specialized storage areas, conservation laboratories, and a central reading room that rivaled the finest university libraries. Uncle Martin's apartment, occupying the top floor, was comfortable without being luxurious, its walls lined with his personal book collection, the volumes he had loved enough to keep separate from his precious archive. I spent my first month simply learning the organization system, working with the small staff of conservators and security specialists who maintained the facility. Each day brought new discoveries as I explored sections of the collection I hadn't had time to examine during the frantic moving process. In the second month, I began reading Uncle Martin's acquisition journals in chronological order, tracing his evolution from enthusiastic book collector to what one journal entry self-deprecatingly called literary James Bond with reading glasses. His accounts were sometimes harrowing, sometimes hilarious, but always driven by his core belief that knowledge deserved preservation, regardless of political, religious, or cultural boundaries. By the third month, I had begun corresponding with select scholars around the world, contacts from Uncle Martin's carefully maintained network, vetted by Harrison, who were researching topics related to specific items in the collection. Following Uncle Martin's protocols, I never revealed the location or full extent of the archives, instead sharing digital scans of relevant pages or offering to check specific references. These exchanges led to my first academic publication, a paper co-authored with a professor from Oxford about a previously unknown variant of a medieval text contained in the collection. The scholarly recognition was gratifying, but more meaningful was the feeling that I was continuing Uncle Martin's work, making the knowledge he had safeguarded accessible to those who could appreciate and build upon it. 6 months into my temporary stay, I realized I had no desire to return to my former life. The teaching position I had once found satisfying now seemed limited compared to the work I was doing with the collection. Through Harrison's connections, I arranged to sell my apartment and make the Montana facility my permanent home. James and Valerie were baffled by my decision to, quote, abandon my career to become a hermit in Montana, as James put it during a rare phone call. "What are you even doing up there?" he demanded. "Don't tell me you're still obsessing over those worthless books." I smiled to myself, thinking of the conservation work I'd completed that morning on a manuscript that 3 major museums believed lost forever. "Just finding my path," I replied. Uncle Martin's collection turned out to be more interesting than I expected. "Well, I hope it was worth it," he said dismissively. Dad sold the mansion for $4. $3 million. The developers are breaking ground next week. The news brought a sense of closure. The mansion had served its purpose, protecting Uncle Martin's legacy until it could be transferred to its permanent home. "I'm glad Dad got a good price," I said sincerely. "How are you doing with the investment portfolio Uncle Martin left you?" James launched into a lengthy complaint about how some of the holdings were underperforming, and how he'd repositioned the assets against his financial advisor's recommendations. I listened patiently, recognizing that James would always value immediate returns over long-term vision, exactly why Uncle Martin had matched each inheritance to the recipient's character. A year after Uncle Martin's death, I invited Harrison to the Montana facility to show him what I'd accomplished. The collection was now fully cataloged, with improved storage systems and a digitization project underway for the most fragile items. "Martin would be proud," Harrison said as we toured the facility. "You've not only preserved his work, but extended it." "I've been thinking about the next step," I told him, leading him to my office where maps and documents were spread across the desk. Uncle Martin's journals mentioned several lost texts he spent decades trying to locate without success. I believe I've found new leads on 3 of them. Harrison examined my research with a growing smile. "The Baghdad astronomical treatises? Martin chased those for 30 years. I've identified a private collection in Lebanon that may have acquired them through the antiquities black market in the 1990s. And these church records in Portugal might help locate the lost Iberian Jewish manuscripts Uncle Martin traced to Lisbon before losing the trail." "You're not just preserving the collection," Harrison realized. "You're continuing the hunt." I nodded, feeling a sense of purpose that had been missing from my life before Uncle Martin's bequest. He spent his life rescuing knowledge that might otherwise be lost. I can't think of a better way to honor his legacy than to continue that mission. "It won't be easy," Harrison warned. Martin had decades of experience, specialized training, and a network of contacts that took years to develop. "I have his journals, his contacts, and apparently," I smiled, "a natural aptitude that he recognized long before I did. Besides, I'm not starting from scratch. I have you." Harrison laughed. "Indeed you do. And I must admit, Retirement has been rather boring compared to the adventures I had assisting your uncle. Over the next 5 years, my life transformed in ways I could never have imagined. Using Uncle Martin's resources and Harrison's guidance, I developed the skills needed to track down lost texts and cultural treasures. My first independent acquisition, recovering a set of scientific manuscripts believed destroyed during the Spanish Civil War, led to others, each success building my confidence and expanding my network. The academic papers I published, carefully anonymized to protect the collection's security, established my reputation in scholarly circles. Museums and universities began approaching me as they had once approached Uncle Martin, seeking help locating lost items of cultural significance. I developed my own ethical framework, building on Uncle Martin's principles but adapting them to contemporary challenges. Where he had sometimes operated in legal gray areas out of necessity, I established the Blackwood Foundation, a legitimate nonprofit dedicated to preserving and digitizing endangered texts around the world, which provided cover for some of my more sensitive operations. My siblings eventually stopped questioning my choices when the foundation began receiving positive media coverage and prestigious grants. James even jokingly asked if I could use my book detective skills to find a rare first edition for one of his clients, never suspecting that I had recently negotiated the return of a looted manuscript to its country of origin, while navigating 3 different countries' legal systems. On the 5th anniversary of Uncle Martin's death, I stood in the heart of the Montana facility, now expanded to include new conservation labs and a secure digital archive, and reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with what my family had dismissed as a worthless inheritance. The just old books that had prompted my siblings' mockery had opened doors to a life of purpose, adventure, and meaning I could never have anticipated. Uncle Martin hadn't just left me a collection. He had given me a mission, one perfectly aligned with passions I hadn't fully recognized in myself. More importantly, his faith in me had revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed. The shy English teacher who had once feared standing up to her domineering siblings now negotiated with government officials and navigated international cultural property laws with confidence. That evening, I added a new entry to my own acquisition journal, documenting my recent recovery of a set of scientific papers thought lost in a university fire decades ago. As I wrote, I realized I was smiling, the same slightly secretive smile I remembered seeing on Uncle Martin's face during family gatherings when someone asked what he'd been up to lately. Now I understood that smile. It was the quiet satisfaction of someone who had found their true calling, a purpose that transcended ordinary measures of success and connected them to something larger than themselves. Uncle Martin's greatest gift hadn't been the valuable collection or even the financial resources to maintain it. It had been the opportunity to discover that true wealth lies in living a life aligned with your deepest values, contributing to something that will outlast you, and finding the courage to become the person you're meant to be, even when others can't yet see who that is. Some inheritances can't be measured in dollars. Some treasures aren't recognized as valuable by those who see only with their eyes rather than their hearts. And sometimes, the greatest adventures begin with what others dismiss as just old books. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.